The wind moved across the Levant like a slow memory. It carried with it the dust of old wars and the scent of salt from a dying sea. The year was 1391, and the last of the old Crusader ports were no more than skeletons of white stone under the heat of the sun. But if you listened, if you truly listened, you could still hear the ocean whispering the names of knights and pilgrims who had once dreamed of God and glory. Sir Roland de Clare rode alone. His horse, a tired gray destrier named Bramble, moved with the weary grace of an animal that had known too many roads. The knight's armor was dulled by sand. His tabard, once scarlet and white, had faded into the color of old parchment. Yet he still carried himself with that quiet, deliberate dignity of a man who had outlived the age that made him. The path before him wound downward through olive groves and thorn. In the distance, through a curtain of haze, the sea glimmered, a silver breath on the horizon. That was Acre, or what was left of it. The great city that had been the jewel of Christendom now lay in ruin, its towers broken, its harbor choked with forgotten ships. The crescent banners of the Mamluks hung limp in the heat. Roland did not come to fight. There were no crusades left to fight. He came because the place called him, as dreams call the dying. He was 60 years old now, older than most who had borne the cross. His hands trembled sometimes when he tried to pray. He had seen empires rise and fall, kings crowned and murdered, holy wars lost to sand and wind. Yet still, somewhere beneath the years, he remembered the boy who had once believed that a sword could serve both God and mercy. The road into Acre was silent. The city gates had long been torn down, the stones scattered. Grass grew between them. He guided Bramble through what had once been the marketplace, now a graveyard of columns and toppled fountains. Children watched from doorways, brown-eyed, barefoot, the grandchildren of those who had taken the city back from the Franks. They said nothing. They had learned that the ghosts of foreigners were best left undisturbed. Roland dismounted near the ruined church of St. Andrew. The cross atop its tower had fallen long ago, but the altar still stood, cracked and half buried in dust. He knelt there, removing his helm, and closed his eyes. The air smelled faintly of myrrh, or maybe it was just the sea. He spoke softly, almost afraid to break the silence. "I have come home," he said. "If home is where one's sins begin." A voice answered him, or perhaps it was memory. He could not tell. No knight returns home, Roland. Only pilgrims. He opened his eyes. A shadow moved in the archway, the outline of a man in coarse robes carrying a staff. The stranger's beard was white, his eyes bright and steady. "I thought this place abandoned," Roland said. "It is," the man replied, "except by those who have nowhere else to go." They studied each other for a long moment. The knight saw the faint cross sewn into the man's sleeve, not red but black, the mark of a Dominican. "A friar here?" "Brother Anselm," said the man, bowing slightly, "custodian of ashes and echoes." "You look like one yourself." Roland smiled faintly. "Once I was a crusader. Now I am only a traveler." "Then you are welcome. Travelers are all that God has left." They spoke little after that. The friar led him to a small cell built against the side of the ruined cloister. There was bread, hard as stone, and a jar of watered wine. The walls were covered with old Latin script, verses of penitence painted long before the fall. As he ate, Roland felt the strange calm that comes when a journey has no further destination. Night descended quietly. The sea turned black, the sky unfolded with stars. Somewhere in the city a dog barked. Somewhere else a bell clanged, though there were no churches left with bells. Roland lay awake on the stone floor listening. He dreamed of a road made of fire stretching eastward into endless steppe. He saw horsemen riding beneath banners of crimson silk, their bows singing in the wind. A voice, neither friend nor foe, called his name from the far horizon. When he awoke, his face was wet with sweat, and the first light of dawn was spilling across the ruins. Brother Anselm was already awake, tending a small fire. "You dreamed," he said without looking up. "How would you know?" "Because all who come here dream the same." Roland joined him, warming his hands. "Of what?" "The road," said the friar. "Always the road, eastward, beyond the deserts. Some say it leads to paradise, others to nothing, but the dream always calls." Roland thought of his years in the service of kings, in Cyprus, in Antioch, in the endless deserts of Sinai. The road had never ended. It only curved back upon itself like a prayer unanswered. "Tell me," he asked, "what lies beyond the road?" The friar looked toward the horizon. "Mongols," he said softly. "And perhaps truth." The word stirred something in Roland. He remembered rumors whispered among the dying crusaders decades before. Tales of a great Khan who had once considered allying with Christendom against the Saracens. Letters had been sent, envoys dispatched, but the alliance never came. Some said the Khan had died, others that the church had refused his hand. It had always troubled Roland, the thought that perhaps the wars of faith might have ended differently, had men listened instead of judged. He stayed in Acre for 3 days. On the third, Brother Anselm gave him a small leather satchel containing a scroll sealed with wax. "It came from the east," the friar said, "from men who travel the Silk Road. They say it bears the mark of a Christian who serves a Mongol king." Roland unrolled a corner. The script was in Latin, the handwriting neat and deliberate. "To any brother of the cross who still remembers the light, know that the Lord has not abandoned his children in Cathay. There are those who keep the faith under the protection of the Khan. Seek the city of Samarkand and you shall find us." He looked up. "Who sent this?" "No one knows. It arrived years ago." None dared answer. Roland felt the old stirrings of purpose, quiet but insistent. Samarkand, the word itself sounded like a promise. A city beyond deserts and empires beyond despair. "I will go," he said. The friar studied him. "You are old, Sir Roland." "Then I must hurry." Before dawn he saddled Bramble and took the eastern road. The air smelled of dust and salt. Behind him the ruins of Acre faded into the mist like a city sinking beneath the sea. Ahead lay mountains, deserts, and perhaps the truth he had long sought. For days he rode through Galilee and across the Jordan plain, where shepherds watched him pass with wary eyes. He crossed into the lands of the Mamluks, bribing guards at river crossings with the last of his silver. Sometimes he rode with merchants bound for Damascus. Other times he slept alone beneath the stars, his sword within reach, his prayers drifting upward like smoke. He began to notice how the world had changed. The old Crusader fortresses were crumbling. The banners of the cross had been replaced by the green of Islam. Yet everywhere he went, he found traces, a carved emblem on a stone gate, a Latin prayer etched into a fountain, relics of an age that refused to vanish completely. In Damascus, he met a Genoese trader named Niccolo, who dealt in silks and spices. The man was shrewd but kind, and when he heard of Roland's destination, he laughed. "Samarkand? You might as well seek Eden, old knight. The road is long and the Mongols are at war with themselves." "Still the road exists," Roland said. "Aye, and it is guarded by death and snow. But if you must go, go east from Aleppo, then across the Euphrates. There are caravans, Persians, Armenians, Jews, who take that path. Travel with them, and perhaps you will live long enough to regret it." Niccolo gave him a small purse of coins and a map drawn on parchment. "A gift," he said, "for the last crusader I shall ever meet." Roland bowed his head. "For the last merchant who still believes in gifts." He left Damascus at dawn, joining a caravan bound for Tabriz. There were camels laden with silk, donkeys carrying jars of saffron and wine, and a dozen men from every corner of the world, Greeks, Arabs, Tartars, and one silent man who carried a cross hidden under his cloak. The desert stretched before them like an ocean turned to stone. Days melted into one another. Sandstorms rose without warning, swallowing the horizon in red haze. At night, the stars hung so close it seemed one could reach out and touch them. Roland felt the rhythm of the road enter his bones, a slow heartbeat that echoed the march of centuries. One evening, as they camped beside a ruined caravanserai, the silent man approached him. His face was weathered, his eyes gray. He spoke in halting French. "You are of the cross," Roland nodded. "Once," the man smiled faintly. "Once is enough." He removed the amulet from his neck, a small metal disc engraved with strange symbols. "Take this. It will be recognized in Samarkand." Roland hesitated. "Who are you?" "A servant," the man said, "of many masters and of one truth." He walked away before Roland could ask more. That night, a wind rose from the east, carrying with it a smell of snow and far-off steppes. Roland lay awake listening to the hiss of sand against canvas, thinking of the letter, the amulet, and the city that waited beyond the horizon. The journey had begun again. The road carried them north and east through lands that seemed untouched by memory. Days blurred together. The sound of hooves and the soft groan of camels became a kind of music. The sky changed slowly from pale gold to a harder, colder blue as they left the warmth of Syria behind. They crossed plains where bones of forgotten armies still whitened beneath the sun, and villages where people spoke languages Roland could not name. Yet everywhere, when night came, there were the same small fires, the same taste of bread and smoke, the same weary peace of men who knew that tomorrow would bring only more road. Weeks passed. The caravan dwindled as merchants left to follow side routes toward their own cities. Those who remained moved more quietly, as if afraid that speaking might draw the attention of the desert itself. Roland found that his thoughts had grown slow and wide like the horizon. He stopped thinking of years or kingdoms. He thought only of the rhythm of breath, the faint ringing in his ears that might have been the echo of distant bells. Sometimes he would whisper a psalm, sometimes only a name, Alice, the woman he had left behind 40 years ago, when faith had seemed brighter than love. They reached the Euphrates at dusk. The river was swollen from spring melt, a long mirror of bronze beneath the sinking sun. They crossed on rafts made from reeds and barrels, guiding the animals one by one. The water was cold, and Roland felt its pull like a memory of baptism, a brief, sharp awakening. On the far bank, an old man recited verses from the Quran while others murmured prayers in Greek. No one mocked the difference. Faith was only another tongue spoken to the same silence. Beyond the river, the land began to rise. The air turned thin and clear, and the nights grew cold enough that breath shone like smoke. Snow still lingered on the edges of cliffs. In the mornings, the mountains blazed pink with sunrise, and Roland felt a strange peace settle over him. He began to understand why prophets and hermits had sought God in desolation. There was nothing left here to distract a man from his own soul. One evening, as the caravan camped near the ruins of an old fortress, a storm rolled down from the hills. The wind howled through the broken towers, scattering sparks from the fires. The travelers huddled beneath their cloaks. Roland sat apart, his back against a fallen stone carved with Arabic script. He traced the grooves with his fingers, feeling the curve of letters whose meaning he did not know.
He thought about the friar's words. All who come here dream the same dream.
Perhaps this too was part of it. When the storm passed, the stars returned, only thousands of them, cold and clear. The silent man who had given him the amulet appeared again and sat beside him. For a while they said nothing. Then the man spoke softly. "Do you know why the road is called the Silk Road?" Roland smiled faintly. "Because it carries silk?" The man shook his head. "Because it binds what would otherwise unravel. East and west, belief and doubt, threads in the same weave. When one breaks the cloth of the world phrase, Roland turned the amulet in his hand. "And you? Which thread are you?" "I am the one that wanders loose," the man said. "But even a loose thread remembers where it was woven." He stood, nodded once, and disappeared into the dark. Roland did not see him again after that night. They reached Tabriz at the edge of summer. The city shimmered like a mirage. Domes of turquoise, markets spilling over with color, the scent of spice and smoke and copper. Here the Mongols ruled, though their empire had splintered into rival khanates. Still there was order of a sort, and a tolerance born of weariness. Roland watched Persians, Turks, Armenians, and even a few pale-faced men from far Europe moving side by side through the bazaar. For the first time in years he heard church bells, faint, hidden in the back streets where a Nestorian chapel still survived. He followed the sound. The chapel was small, built of brick and shadow. Inside, an old priest was lighting lamps before an icon of Christ painted in the style of the East, the eyes deep and calm, the mouth half smiling. Roland knelt. The priest looked up and said something in Syriac. Roland did not understand. He placed the amulet and the scroll on the step before the altar. The priest studied them for a long time, then nodded slowly. "You go east," he said in broken Latin. "Yes. Then go with God. And with caution. The steppe has many gods." Roland slept that night in a corner of the chapel. He dreamed of wide plains, of horses running beneath a moon that never set, of cities made of light. When he woke, dawn was creeping through the lattice window and he felt lighter, as though some unseen burden had shifted. From Tabriz, the road climbed again into colder country. The caravan moved through passes lined with juniper and snow. The air tasted of iron. At every stop, Roland saw more signs of Mongol presence. Way stations with carved stone steles, riders wearing fur and lamellar armor, bows slung across their backs. Yet they were not the savage hordes he had imagined in youth. They were disciplined, quiet, their faces unreadable. Once a patrol halted the caravan. The leader, a young Mongol with eyes like polished amber, examined Roland for a long time before speaking in accented Persian. "You are far from home, old one." "I am on pilgrimage," Roland answered. The Mongol nodded. "All men are, but some forget where they began." He handed the amulet back without comment and waved them through. The land beyond the mountains opened like a great breath, endless grass, rivers that wound like silver snakes, the horizon a straight line between sky and earth. The wind here never stopped. It moved through the grass in slow waves, carrying the smell of rain and smoke and distance. Roland had never seen anything so vast. It humbled him more than any cathedral ever had. The caravan followed the main track northward, stopping at intervals at the Khan's postal stations. They shared fermented mare's milk with Mongol riders, listened to songs in tongues that rose and fell like birds in flight. Sometimes at night, Roland would ride a little apart and watch the stars turn. There was a strange clarity in the solitude. The wars of his youth felt far away, like stories told by another man. Weeks later, they reached a river broader than any Roland had ever seen. On its far side stood a city ringed with blue-tiled walls, its gates carved with dragons and lions. Banners fluttered from the towers. The merchants murmured the name with reverence, Samarkand, the heart of the world. As they approached, Roland felt an unexpected tremor of fear. He had traveled half a lifetime to reach this place, following a letter written by hands long dead, chasing a promise that might never have existed. Yet the city shimmered before him, real as dawn. The amulet grew warm against his chest. He crossed the bridge and entered the gates of Samarkand. The guards barely glanced at him. To them he was only another traveler among hundreds. The streets were alive with color, stalls piled with jade, silk, spices that burned the air with sweetness. In the distance, he saw the great mosque rising above the rooftops, its dome like a drop of the sky itself. Somewhere behind it, hidden from view, stood a smaller church built of pale stone. Its bell rang once, soft as memory. Roland followed the sound through narrow lanes until he came to a courtyard shaded by cypress trees. There, beneath an arch, stood a man in plain robes, his face half lost in shadow. When he turned, Roland felt the shock of recognition. It was the same man who had given him the amulet in the desert, though his hair was now streaked with gray. "You found the road," the man said. "I followed it," Roland replied. "And now that you've reached the end, what will you seek?" Roland looked past him at the small church, the lamp burning within, the faint echo of chanting. "Not forgiveness," he said. "Perhaps only peace." The man nodded. "Then you have already found it." Roland stepped inside. The air was cool and scented with incense. On the altar lay a single book written in many hands, Latin beside Arabic, Greek beside Mongolian, the record of travelers who had come before. He added his name to the edge of a page and left his sword beside it. Then he knelt, closed his eyes, and let the silence fill him. Outside, the wind moved through the cypresses carrying dust, and the faint chime of bells far away. Days passed in Samarkand like flowing water. Roland moved slowly, allowing himself to notice every detail. The curve of the tiled domes, the way sunlight caught on the edges of copper vessels in the market, the distant calls of merchants hawking silk and saffron in tongues he could barely follow. He walked among scholars in the shaded courtyards of madrasas, listening without understanding, letting the sound of learning wash over him like a gentle tide. Words, he realized, were only part of the story. The rest was carried in the rhythm of life itself. Sometimes he would rest beneath a plane tree, watching the street vendors unpack their goods. Children ran past, barefoot, their laughter a soft percussion that reminded him of quiet mornings in villages long vanished. The city moved around him in a slow, purposeful rhythm, unhurried by the concerns of the distant lands he had left behind. Here, the wars of Europe felt like stories told by firelight. Important once, but distant now, half familiar and half dream. Roland met others who had also come from faraway lands, travelers and envoys sent to the court of the local Khan. They spoke of distant conquests and failed alliances, of letters that had crossed thousands of miles and vanished, of merchants who had brought spices from India and silk from Cathay. Roland listened quietly, never needing to interrupt. He had learned that the stories were alive whether he repeated them or not. It was enough to hear them, to let them enter his mind and settle there like seeds in fertile soil. At night, the city transformed. Lanterns swung in front of small doorways, casting moving shadows across the stone streets. The scent of incense mixed with the sharp tang of iron from the smith's workshops. Roland would sit by the edge of a fountain and dip his hand into the cool water, letting the ripples carry away the tension of travel. Even in this foreign place, far from the lands of his youth, he felt the old calm of prayer return. It was not a loud thing, not a fire of passion, but a quiet flame that warmed his chest and reminded him of all the roads he had traveled. The silent man returned after several days. He did not announce himself. Roland first noticed him in the courtyard of the small church, standing in the shade of an archway as if he had always been there. His eyes held the same calm intensity, and when he approached, Roland felt that familiar mixture of reassurance and unease, the sense that some truths could only be revealed slowly. "You have come far," the man said softly. "And yet," Roland replied, "the road still stretches beyond." The man smiled faintly. "The road stretches beyond only because men refuse to rest. You have arrived, yet you have also begun anew. That is how the world turns, one journey ending as another begins." Roland nodded. He did not need to ask which journey. The answer was clear in the silence. in the air that trembled with possibility. He spent the next days moving quietly through the city, visiting the library of the Khan, where scrolls and codices from the farthest reaches of the known world were collected. He touched the pages carefully, feeling the grain of paper and the weight of ink, the collective memory of countless men and women who had dreamed and recorded their lives in distant lands. One evening, while sitting beneath a high window that looked out over the city walls, Roland thought of his own life, the battles and losses, the promises and betrayals. The faces of fallen comrades rose in his memory. Young knights whose eyes had been full of hope, now only shadows in stone tombs across the Levant. He did not mourn them with bitterness. Instead, he felt the quiet understanding that all of them, in some way, had traveled this same road, and that every step he had taken was a continuation of their journey. The winds shifted that night, carrying with them the smell of distant mountains and winter snow. Roland felt a stirring deep within, a quiet insistence that he move again, even though he had reached the city that had drawn him across continents. Perhaps this was not a place of endings, but of preparation. Perhaps the road, always the road, was the teacher and he its patient student. He began to explore beyond the city walls, walking the hills and plains nearby. In the early mornings, he could see caravans moving toward the east, carrying merchants and envoys like him, their dust rising slowly in the sun. At times, he followed them silently for hours, learning the rhythm of travel, the way the camels adjusted their steps to one another, the soft murmurs of guides calling directions in distant tongues. Each day, he felt the lesson grow stronger: patience, observation, quiet endurance. These were the tools of the long journey, more reliable than sword or shield. During one such walk, he discovered a small hidden chapel at the edge of a grove, its stones half buried and its roof broken. The faint sound of water dripping echoed from within. Roland knelt at the entrance, letting the quiet fill him. He remembered the friar's words from Acre, "All who come here dream the same dream," and realized that the dream was not of destination, but of journey. He had followed the road, yes, but it was the road itself, with its endless horizons and quiet lessons that had shaped him, and perhaps would shape all men who dared to travel. The days became weeks, and Roland grew accustomed to the rhythm of Samarkand, the quiet pulse of life stretching across the city and into the surrounding hills. He met scholars, merchants, and travelers who taught him fragments of languages, small insights into distant lands. Yet even as he learned, he remained a pilgrim in spirit, always observing, listening, letting the world unfold without demanding its secrets. One morning, a messenger arrived, carrying a letter sealed with the mark of a distant Mongol Khan. Roland read it slowly. It spoke of distant provinces in rebellion, of envoys sent to negotiate peace, and of travelers from Europe who had crossed the deserts and mountains seeking wisdom and refuge. There were names he recognized, places he had visited decades before, and hints of alliances that had never been fully realized. He folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his satchel, and felt the quiet thrill of connection. A reminder that even in the vastness of the world, paths could cross, and history could be observed, understood, and carried forward by those willing to witness it. Roland returned to the chapel at sunset, sitting beneath the arch of broken stone and listening to the last light fade across the city. The air was cool, and the distant bells of hidden churches echoed softly, harmonizing with the whisper of wind through the cypress trees. He closed his eyes, letting his thoughts drift like the currents of a gentle river, understanding, as he had for many years now, that the journey was never about conquest or glory, but about the patient observation of the world, the quiet endurance of the soul, and the slow, meditative unfolding of life itself. The days melted into one another with the quiet regularity of sunlight shifting over ancient stones. Roland walked slowly through the city, tracing the worn edges of bridges and aqueducts, feeling the cool bronze of carved reliefs beneath his fingertips. The merchants no longer startled him with their calls, nor did the children running through the streets. Instead, he watched them with a gentle attentiveness, as though each movement, each sound were a note in the song of the city. He began to understand that Samarkand itself was a teacher, that patience and observation were as much a path to wisdom as prayer or meditation. One morning he followed the path along the river, where the water flowed steady and deep, reflecting the turquoise domes and the jagged mountains in the distance. He paused to watch the fish leap from the river's surface, the merchants pushing their boats through the current and the small children washing themselves along the bank. It was simple, ordinary life, yet it struck him with the intensity of revelation. The world endured unhurried and untroubled by his presence, yet in its endurance lay a profound lesson, that time was not a thief but a teacher, and that quiet observation could reveal truth greater than any battle or conquest. At midday he rested beneath an ancient plane tree, where the scent of flowers mingled with the dry warmth of the city. He opened the leather satchel containing the scroll and amulet, examining them again with deliberate care. The inscriptions on the scroll seemed to breathe beneath his fingertips, faintly warm with the memory of distant hands. He could not read them fully, yet he felt their significance as a pulse in the air around him. The amulet, smooth and cool against his palm, seemed to carry the rhythm of the road itself, the slow heartbeat of journeying, the quiet insistence of movement towards something beyond comprehension. Over the following days, Roland wandered further from the city's center, exploring gardens and courtyards tucked behind tall walls. He noticed the interplay of light and shadow, the way birds moved among the branches, the faint murmur of water in hidden fountains. At times he would sit for hours in silence, letting the city's rhythm seep into him, letting the lessons of endurance, patience, and quiet observation become part of his own breath. At night the city seemed to transform entirely. Lanterns glimmered in every doorway. The stars hung low and cold above the rooftops, and the distant bells echoed faintly, carrying across the rooftops and walls. Roland would lie on the roof of his lodging, listening to the wind and the faint murmur of the city below, letting the stillness of night become a meditation. In the quiet, he remembered the long years of war and loss, the friends and comrades who had disappeared into dust and memory, and he felt no grief, only the serene acknowledgement that all things must pass, that the road itself was the enduring teacher. He visited the Khan's library once more, carefully tracing the inked lines of maps and texts that depicted lands he had never imagined. He learned of distant cities along the Silk Road, of envoys traveling between Europe and Cathay, of scholars and scribes preserving knowledge through centuries of upheaval. Roland realized that the world was larger and older than he had ever understood, and that his journey, though long and difficult, was but a small thread in the vast tapestry of human endeavor. One afternoon, as he wandered through a narrow alleyway lined with spice merchants, he saw a group of children playing a game of balance and mimicry, leaping across stones and barrels. He paused to watch, his gaze soft, and the children noticed him. They ran to him laughing, offering small gifts, a carved wooden horse, a string of beads, a feather plucked from some distant bird. Roland accepted them with quiet gratitude, feeling the simple joy of connection across time, language, and culture. In their laughter he sensed the enduring pulse of life that he had been seeking, the same pulse that had carried him across deserts, mountains, and rivers. The wind shifted one evening, bringing the scent of distant snow and highlands. Roland followed the air as he often did, wandering toward the city gates where the plains opened into golden stretches of grass. He watched caravans depart, merchants with camels laden with goods, envoys with letters from distant courts. He considered the road that had brought him here, The endless miles, the shifting sands, the mountains and rivers crossed, and felt a quiet sense of completion. Yet he also understood that the road itself was eternal. Every journey ends, but every ending is also a beginning. And the lessons of patience and observation continue to unfold wherever the traveler moves. One morning, as Roland sat beside the river, he noticed a bird alight on a low branch, its wings catching the sunlight. He followed its movements with calm attention, realizing that all life moved in rhythms, patterns, and harmonies, whether or not men noticed. He reflected on his own life, the battles, the victories, the losses, the fleeting triumphs of youth. And yet none of these seemed urgent now. What remained was the quiet presence of the world, the slow unfolding of events, the beauty and simplicity of being a witness to life. Roland spent several weeks in Samarkand, moving without haste, learning without effort, absorbing the city and its people like a gentle current moving through still water. He met scholars who shared fragments of philosophy and mathematics, artists who painted intricate designs upon paper and cloth, and travelers from distant lands who spoke of Europe, India, and the far reaches of Cathay. He listened, learning the rhythms and cadences of their lives, understanding without judgment, feeling the slow accumulation of wisdom that comes only from attention and presence. At night, he often returned to the chapel beneath the cypress trees. He would sit quietly, the faint smell of incense filling the air, the soft murmur of prayers carried through cracks in the walls. Sometimes he placed a hand upon the altar. Sometimes he closed his eyes and he allowed the silence to carry him into reflection. The world, he realized, was vast, and yet within its vastness there was a quiet order. It did not hurry, it did not demand, it simply existed. And those who learned to move with its rhythm discovered a subtle and profound peace. Roland thought often of the road ahead. He had come to Samarkand seeking signs, seeking guidance, perhaps seeking closure. Yet the city itself taught him that the journey was not about arrival, but about perception, understanding, and the patient observation of life. Every moment contained lessons, every person carried history within them, and every corner of the world echoed with stories waiting to be heard. The silent man appeared once more, as if summoned by the rhythm of the city itself. He spoke only a few words, soft as a whisper. Peace is not a place. It is the observation of life, the quiet endurance of being, the acceptance of all that is without desire for what might have been. Roland nodded slowly. He understood. The road which had carried him across deserts and mountains, across kingdoms and wars, had led him not only to Samarkand, but to the quiet center of himself. He felt no triumph, no excitement, only a calm recognition that he was exactly where he was meant to be, fully present, fully alive in the rhythm of the world. Roland spent the following days wandering farther into the outskirts of Samarkand, where the city's pulse slowed and the hum of merchants and travelers softened into the quiet murmur of wind through grasses and trees. Here the walls were broken in places and small gardens grew untended, yet the air carried a subtle sweetness, the scent of wild herbs and earth warmed by sun. He would sit beneath a lone tree, feeling the rough bark against his hands, listening to the whisper of leaves. Even in silence there was life. Birds moving among branches, insects tracing invisible patterns, water trickling from a hidden fountain. Each sound, each movement seemed a note in a song that had existed long before his arrival and would continue long after he departed. One afternoon, Roland discovered a narrow lane that led him to a small tea house perched on the edge of the city walls. Its roof was low, its timber worn, but the smell of steeping tea and fresh bread drew him inside. The owner, a quiet man with weathered hands, greeted him without questions, offering a steaming cup in a bowl and a small slice of bread. Roland accepted it, letting the warmth seep into him. feeling the gentle rhythm of hospitality, a lesson in patience and simplicity that required no words to understand. As he sat, he noticed a young boy moving silently through the shadows, carrying a bundle of herbs and small clay jars. Their eyes met briefly, and the boy offered a faint smile. Roland nodded, acknowledging the quiet connection, and returned his attention to the tea, observing the steam rise and swirl in the golden light. The moment was ordinary yet profound. He realized that all the years of travel, all the hardships and dangers, had led him to these small, unremarkable instants, which contained more truth than any battlefield he had ever crossed. The days turned slowly, each one blending into the next like brushstrokes on a canvas. Roland explored further, tracing the paths of merchants' carts, listening to distant conversations in languages he only partially understood, noting the patterns of life that persisted despite the passage of centuries. He observed the diligence of artisans, the quiet discipline of scholars, and the careful balance of commerce and prayer that maintained the city's rhythm. Every encounter, no matter how brief, was a reflection of the enduring order of the world, and Roland felt his own heartbeat settle into harmony with it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant mountains, casting long shadows across the city, Roland returned to the chapel beneath the cypress trees. The doors creaked softly as he entered. He knelt beside the altar, the amulet resting against his chest, and allowed the quiet to wash over him. Outside, the wind stirred the branches, carrying the faint scent of incense, the distant murmur of life, and the gentle chime of bells from hidden churches. He breathed slowly, counting each inhale and exhale, letting the rhythm of the world guide him toward a quiet understanding. Roland remembered the journey across the deserts, the mountains, the rivers, and the long roads between cities. He recalled the faces of companions and strangers alike, merchants, envoys, soldiers, and scholars, and the lessons each had offered, sometimes without knowing. He realized that travel was not merely movement across land, but a slow accumulation of observation, patience, and insight. Life itself was the road, and every step carried wisdom for those willing to see. The silent man returned once again, appearing at the edge of the courtyard, his presence as gentle and unobtrusive as the wind. He sat across from Roland, neither speaking nor demanding attention, simply sharing the quiet of the evening. Roland felt the connection without words, understanding that some truths are transmitted not through speech but through shared stillness. The man's eyes, steady and calm, reflected the same wisdom Roland had begun to recognize in himself. That night, Roland lay on the stone floor of the chapel, the amulet warm against his chest. He closed his eyes, allowing the soft rhythm of the city, the wind, and his own heartbeat to guide him. He thought of the road that had led him here, a path of thousands of miles through deserts, mountains, and foreign lands. He thought of battles fought, companions lost, and the slow unfolding of time. And he understood with a quiet certainty that the journey was not over, nor did it ever truly end. It simply continued, like the wind through the cypress trees, like the flow of rivers past ancient cities, like the slow pulse of life itself. As dawn approached, the first light spilled over the rooftops of Samarkand. Roland rose, feeling the calm of the night linger within him. He walked to the edge of the city walls, looking out at the plains beyond. The distant mountains shimmered faintly in the morning haze. He could hear the soft movement of animals, the distant laughter of children, and the gentle clatter of carts moving along the roads. The world was vast, unhurried, and filled with quiet beauty. Roland began to walk along the wall, each step deliberate, feeling the rhythm of his own movement echo the rhythm of the land. He thought of the cities he had left behind, the battles, the storms, the deserts, and the mountains. He thought of the letter, the amulet, and the promise that had drawn him east, and he understood that the journey was not about reaching a destination, but about the careful observation of the world, the patient endurance of the traveler, and the quiet accumulation of wisdom that comes only to those who are willing to move slowly and notice deeply. Time continued its gentle flow. Roland's movements became meditative. His attention focused on the subtle details of the world. The ripple of water in fountains, the sway of trees in the wind, the soft footsteps of children across cobblestones, the distant song of merchants calling to customers. Each sound and motion became part of a larger pattern, a slow unfolding understanding of life itself. He no longer thought of himself as a knight or a crusader, only as a witness, a traveler, and a student of the world. He spent many mornings in the markets, not as a buyer or seller, but as an observer. He noted the care with which spices were measured and wrapped, the delicate precision of artisans shaping clay and wood, the quiet diligence of scholars copying texts by candlelight. Every gesture, no matter how small, seemed to echo with the weight of history, reminding him of the continuity of life despite war, conquest, or change. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Roland walked to the outskirts of the city where the mountains began. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of snow and stone. He paused on a gentle rise, looking back at the domes and walls of Samarkand. The city was alive, vibrant, and enduring, and yet he felt no attachment, only appreciation. The road had brought him here, but it had also taught him that attachment is unnecessary for understanding. That presence itself is the truest measure of life. The silent man appeared one final time before Roland left the city for a brief journey along the trade routes beyond Samarkand. He placed a hand lightly on Roland's shoulder and whispered, "The road is endless, but your heart will always know its rhythm. Walk slowly, observe deeply, and let the world reveal itself." Roland nodded. He had learned the lesson. The road would continue as it always had, carrying travelers across mountains, deserts, and rivers. And he would continue as well, moving quietly, observing patiently, living fully in the calm, meditative rhythm of life itself. Roland's days following the city became a quiet study in movement and stillness. He left the walls of Samarkand with a gentle awareness of each step, letting the rhythm of travel guide him. The plains beyond were endless, their golden grasses bending in the wind like waves in a quiet sea. Camels moved steadily along the paths, their soft footfalls blending with the distant calls of birds and the occasional laughter of travelers. The sky stretched endlessly above, pale in the morning and rich with color at sunset, reflecting the slow passage of time. He traveled without urgency, letting the road unfold before him rather than pushing to meet it. Every river crossing, every rise of the terrain, every encounter with merchants or nomads became part of the lesson the journey offered. Roland noticed how the travelers adjusted to one another, how they shared water, shade, and stories without thought of ownership or pride. He realized that much of life, like the road, was about harmony, moving in concert with the rhythm of the world rather than forcing one's own pace. The mountains to the north began to rise more sharply. Snow still lingered along shaded slopes and streams rushed down jagged cliffs, cold and clear. Roland paused often, listening to the water, feeling the chill seep through his clothes and letting the quiet of the mountains sink into him. He understood that the peaks, like the cities he had passed, were part of a larger pattern, a reminder of endurance, of patience, of observation without expectation. One evening, as he rested beside a small pool fed by a mountain stream, he saw a reflection of the sky on the water's surface. Clouds drifted slowly, mirrored perfectly, and he noticed a bird skimming the surface, searching for fish, its wings steady and precise. He understood that the bird, like the water, like the wind, moved with a natural rhythm, one that required no effort beyond presence. In that quiet, he felt a deep contentment, a recognition of the lesson the road had been teaching him all along. The caravan moved steadily, with no rush over the high plains and into valleys that seemed to stretch forever. The air carried the faint scent of distant forests and the sharp tang of stone. Roland often walked alone along the edges of the route, letting the wind move through his hair and the sun warm his back. He noticed the small details, the angle of the light on distant ridges, the subtle shift in the pattern of grasses, the way animals moved across the land. These details, small and often unnoticed, held a quiet majesty that spoke to him more than any tale of war or conquest. By the time the sun had begun to dip behind the mountains each evening, Roland had become intimately familiar with the subtle shifts in light, air, and terrain. He could anticipate the change in weather by the scent of the earth, judge the depth of a river by its sound, and recognize the approach of other travelers by their distant footsteps or the faint rattle of their equipment. The road, which had once seemed endless and uncertain, had become a companion, a teacher, a reflection of the calm and attentive mind. He observed the merchants and travelers around him, noticing their small gestures of care and courtesy. They shared food without insistence, tended animals with patience, and guided each other without haste. Roland understood that these ordinary acts, repeated across countless journeys and centuries, were the true markers of endurance and wisdom. Even in a world shaped by empire and war, the quiet constancy of human care persisted, unnoticed by those who sought fame or glory. At night, Roland slept beneath the stars whenever the caravan paused. The vast sky, brilliant with countless points of light, reminded him that his own life was a small part of a much larger pattern. He could hear the whisper of the wind, the soft breathing of camels, and the distant murmur of rivers and forests. Each sound, subtle and often overlooked, became part of his meditation. He no longer sought excitement or recognition. He only sought awareness, a quiet alignment with the world as it existed. The days and nights passed slowly, yet inevitably. Roland's body became accustomed to the rhythm of the road, his mind to the quiet observation of life. He noticed the simple beauty in every sunrise and sunset, the gentle turning of seasons, the patterns in clouds and wind, in animal movement and human gesture. He began to record his observations quietly in a small notebook, each page filled not with grand events or victories, but with the delicate truths of endurance, patience, and awareness. One morning, the caravan paused beside a ridge overlooking a distant river valley. The sunlight shimmered across the water, illuminating the mountains beyond with a soft glow. Roland stood quietly, feeling the wind move across his face, and listened. He could hear nothing but the faint rustle of grasses and the distant call of birds. And yet in that silence he felt the culmination of his journey, the understanding that the road, in all its endless stretches and countless miles, had always been a teacher, showing him the quiet power of attention, patience, and presence. The silent man appeared one last time, without warning, at the edge of the caravan. He did not speak, only nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement and understanding. Roland returned the gesture. No words were needed. The lesson had been absorbed. The journey had been completed, not in the sense of reaching a destination, but in the deeper sense of internal awareness and quiet acceptance. Roland continued eastward, following the gentle curves of the road, observing, listening, and learning. The mountains, rivers, and plains stretched before him without end, yet he carried a sense of peace. He understood that the road itself was eternal, but his own heart, now aligned with its rhythm, had found a quiet stillness that no distance or hardship could disturb. The wind carried the faint scent of distant forests and mountains, the sound of water and animals, the soft murmur of life across countless miles. Roland walked steadily, not seeking, not hurrying, simply moving with awareness, letting the journey itself unfold. He had crossed continents, deserts, and mountains, had seen kingdoms rise and fall, had witnessed the passage of time in ways that few others could comprehend. and now he understood that the greatest lessons of the road were neither victory nor loss, neither fame nor wealth, but the quiet observation of life, the patient endurance of the soul, and the meditative acceptance of the world exactly as it is. As the sun set behind the distant peaks, casting a gentle glow across the land, Roland paused and looked out at the endless horizon. He felt a profound sense of belonging, not to any city, kingdom, or empire, but to the road itself, to the rhythm of the earth, the wind, the rivers, and the mountains. He inhaled deeply, letting the cool, clean air fill his lungs, and exhaled slowly, feeling the pulse of the world move through him. The journey continued, as it always had, and Roland, traveler and witness, walked onward with quiet awareness, his heart attuned to the meditative rhythm of the road, and his soul at peace with the vast and enduring beauty of the world. The plains stretched endlessly, a golden sea under the high sun, and Roland walked among them with the quiet rhythm he had learned to carry within himself. The caravan had thinned now, only a few travelers remaining, yet the wind seemed fuller, carrying the sense of distant forests, snow-capped mountains, and fertile river valleys. Every step was measured, every breath a meditation, and he found in each movement a continuity that connected him to the centuries of travelers who had walked this same road before him. The mountains beyond shimmered with heat in the midday sun, their peaks softened by distance, and Roland could see traces of other roads, faint lines that curved across the hills like silver threads. Caravans had traveled here for generations, and each step he took seemed to echo with the memories of merchants, envoys, and pilgrims who had once followed this path. He moved without haste, letting the landscape reveal itself slowly, noticing the subtle undulations of the hills, the patterns of grass and stone, the quiet movements of animals hidden in the tall brush. Occasionally, the road brought him to small settlements, villages built of clay and stone, where the inhabitants paused to watch him pass. Their faces were weathered, their expressions calm, and there was no need for questions or explanations. Roland had learned the language of observation, and in return the world acknowledged his presence without disturbance. He would sometimes sit by a fountain, watching water ripple and sunlight scatter across its surface, feeling the gentle pull of time and the slow, deliberate unfolding of life in each reflection. One afternoon, as the sun leaned low behind the mountains, he discovered a grove of walnut and poplar trees shading a small hidden pool. He knelt beside it, letting his fingers touch the cool, clear water, and watched as a family of deer drank from the far edge. Their movements were cautious and deliberate, yet unhurried, and he felt a deep connection in that quiet observation. The deer, the wind, the trees, and the mountains all seemed to exist in a single harmony. And Roland understood that the road was not merely a path across land, but a path toward this awareness, a patient study of presence, observation, and the subtle rhythm of the world. At night, the stars hung low and brilliant above the mountains, and Roland would lay on the soft grass, listening to the quiet rustle of leaves, the distant call of owls, and the faint murmur of rivers winding across the plains below. The vastness of the sky reminded him of the smallness of his own existence, and yet he felt no fear or insignificance. Instead, he felt a calm belonging, a recognition that life itself, in its rhythms, patterns, and quiet endurance, was enough. Occasionally, travelers from distant lands joined the caravan briefly, merchants carrying silk, jade, or spices, envoys traveling between courts, and wandering scholars with scrolls and texts. Roland observed them quietly, noting the care in their gestures, the gentle attentiveness to animals and companions, and the unspoken rules that governed their movement. He understood that these small acts, repeated endlessly across generations, were the true markers of civilization, more enduring than kings, armies, or conquests. The road led him further north and east, into valleys carved by rivers and dotted with clusters of trees. He noticed the subtle changes in the air, the faint scent of snow lingering on distant peaks, the dryness of the plains giving way to moisture from hidden streams, the sharp taste of minerals in the wind. Each detail became part of his meditation, each observation a quiet connection to the larger world around him. He walked steadily, without hurry, allowing the road to guide his steps and the rhythm of the land to shape his thoughts. One morning, the caravan paused at the edge of a small settlement built along a river. The villagers moved calmly among their homes and fields, tending gardens and livestock. Roland observed the patterns of labor, the quiet coordination of families, and the natural rhythm of daily life. He spent the day moving slowly through the streets, noticing the intricate weaving of stone and wood in the buildings, the careful placement of wells and fountains, the soft laughter of children playing beside the river. Everything seemed deliberate yet effortless, and he realized that the mastery of observation lay not in changing the world, but in noticing it fully. By evening, he walked to the river's edge and watched the water flow toward distant mountains, its movement steady and unhurried. The sound of the river mingling with the wind through the trees and the faint hum of human life became a meditation in itself. He reflected on the road he had traveled, deserts, mountains, cities, and plains, and recognized that the journey was not about reaching a destination, but about learning to move with awareness, patience, and quiet understanding. The silent man appeared once more, standing at the edge of the settlement as though he had emerged from the wind itself. He said nothing at first, merely observing Roland with calm intensity. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft and deliberate. The road stretches endlessly, yet the lesson is always the same. Observe, endure, and let the world teach you its rhythm. All else is secondary. Roland nodded. He had understood this truth on countless stretches of road, under countless skies, across deserts and rivers, and now in the quiet valleys of the north. The journey itself, he realized, had become the teacher, and he was its patient student. As the night fell, Roland sat beneath a tree, feeling the wind move through the branches and listening to the soft call of distant animals. The stars reflected in the river, and he let the quiet of the world seep into him, aligning his own heartbeat with the slow, meditative rhythm that the road had always offered. He no longer sought fame, glory, or recognition. He sought only presence, observation, and the enduring calm that comes from understanding life as it truly is. The road would continue, as it always had. Mountains, rivers, plains, and cities stretched endlessly ahead, carrying travelers across the land and through time. And Roland, traveler and witness, moved forward with deliberate steps, his heart attuned to the rhythm of the world, and his soul at peace with the vast, quiet beauty of life itself. The next days were filled with quiet observation and gentle movement. The road carried Roland and the remaining travelers across rolling hills and through narrow valleys, each bend revealing a landscape subtly different from the last. The wind shifted constantly, sometimes carrying the scent of distant forests, sometimes the dry dust of the plains. Roland learned to move with it, noticing its subtleties, the way it rustled grasses, swirled around rocks, and shaped the flight of birds. Each gust became a lesson, a reminder that the world operated in patterns beyond immediate perception, yet always within reach of patient observation. At dawn, he often rose before the caravan stirred, walking alone along the high ridges where the sunlight poured golden across the land. From these heights, he could see rivers twisting like ribbons through valleys, the scattered roofs of villages glinting in the sun, and distant mountain peaks capped with snow. The world stretched infinitely before him, yet he felt no fear of the unknown. He had learned that presence, attentiveness, and calm endurance were sufficient companions for any journey. The caravan occasionally intersected with other travelers, merchants moving east with spices and silk, envoys carrying letters from distant khans, and wandering scholars with books and scrolls. Roland observed them silently, noting the precision with which they managed their animals, the careful sharing of food and water, and the subtle courtesies that allowed human life to function across long, harsh distances. These small, deliberate acts, repeated endlessly across centuries, were in his mind far more remarkable than any battle or conquest he had witnessed in youth. One afternoon, the caravan paused beside a river that glimmered like silver in the sunlight. Roland knelt at the edge, letting his fingers touch the cold, clear water, watching as small fish moved among the stones, their shadows flickering in the current. A family of travelers crossed the river nearby, their movements careful and deliberate, guiding camels and pack animals across slippery rocks. He noticed the small gestures, a hand placed to steady an animal, a whispered instruction, a shared smile, and felt a quiet awe at the continuity of human endeavor, the endurance that allowed life to flourish even in remote lands. At night, he would lie beneath the stars, listening to the faint hum of the caravan settling for rest, the soft sigh of wind through grasses, and the distant cries of nocturnal animals. The constellations above shifted slowly as hours passed, and Roland felt the steady heartbeat of the world beneath him. He thought of the road behind him, stretching across deserts, mountains, rivers, and cities, and of the path still ahead, winding into lands unknown. And he felt neither fear nor urgency, only a profound calm, a recognition that the journey itself, the act of moving with awareness, was the destination. He began to notice the smallest details, the ripple of water in streams, the subtle sway of grasses, the patterns of bird flight, the gentle coordination of animals in the caravan. Each observation deepened his understanding of life as a living, breathing tapestry, woven from countless threads of movement, sound, and presence. He realized that the road, which had once seemed a mere path across land, was in fact a teacher of profound patience and insight. One morning, as dawn painted the mountains with soft pink light, Roland paused to observe a small group of shepherds tending their flocks on a distant slope. The sheep moved with a quiet, unhurried rhythm, guided by shepherds whose gestures were precise yet gentle. The wind carried the faint scent of grasses and distant snow, and the sunlight caught in the dew on the ground. Roland felt a deep, meditative peace, recognizing that life in its simplest forms, observation, care, and presence, carried the deepest lessons. The silent man appeared once more, standing at the edge of the caravan as the travelers prepared to move. He did not speak, only watched with calm intensity. Roland understood without words. The man's presence was a reminder that the road itself, the patient observation of life, and the quiet endurance of the traveler were the true constants across centuries and lands. Days passed in this rhythm. Roland moved with the caravan, often walking at the edges, letting the wind, the terrain, and the cadence of the animals guide him. He noted every subtle detail, the way dust settled after a breeze, the shift in scent as the caravan passed from plains to valleys, the distant sound of a stream before it appeared on the horizon. Each element was a teacher, and he absorbed its lesson with patient attention. Occasionally, travelers from distant cities joined the caravan, bringing news of faraway kingdoms, minor skirmishes, and shifts in alliances among khans and rulers. Roland listened, but he did not concern himself with political outcomes. Instead, he focused on observing human behavior, the careful tending of animals, the quiet negotiation of trade, the gestures of courtesy and respect exchanged between strangers. These were the real lessons of the road, enduring beyond the rise and fall of armies or empires. One evening, as the caravan camped beneath a crescent moon, Roland walked to a small hill overlooking the plain. The wind was cool and carried the faint scent of distant forests. He could see the lights of a few villages in the distance, the glimmer of rivers and the shadows of mountains rising beyond. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting the vastness of the world, the rhythm of the wind, and the quiet presence of life sink into him. He understood that the road, the journey, and the world itself were inseparable, and that true wisdom lay in the calm, meditative observation of all that exists. At dawn, he rose with the caravan moving steadily eastward. The mountains ahead loomed large, their peaks hidden in mist, and the road wound upward in gentle curves. Roland felt no fatigue, only a quiet anticipation of the lessons the next stretch of the journey would bring. He noticed the delicate patterns in the rock, the interplay of light and shadow, and the subtle sound of distant rivers. Every detail, no matter how small, was a teacher. Every moment an opportunity to deepen his understanding of the world. The days flowed like this for many weeks. Roland's attention to the smallest details, the sway of trees, the rhythm of animal movement, the sound of water over stones, the patterns of clouds, mind became a meditation, a continual practice of awareness and presence. He observed other travelers, noting the subtle gestures of kindness, patience, and endurance, and found in these small acts the deepest reflections of human civilization. One night, as the caravan rested beneath a wide-open sky, Roland noticed the distant glimmer of firelight on a far slope. He walked quietly toward it and found a small group of nomads tending a campfire. They welcomed him with gentle gestures, offering bread and water. He accepted without words, observing their careful preparation of food, their tending of animals, and the respectful silence they maintained around the fire. In this simple scene, he recognized the continuity of human life across time and space, the endurance, care, and attentiveness that sustained people long before him and would continue long after he was gone. The morning air was crisp as Roland left the nomads' camp, walking slowly along the winding road that led deeper into the mountains. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the terrain, illuminating small wildflowers that had claimed pockets of soil between stones. He moved with deliberate care, noticing each curve of the path, each subtle change in slope, and the delicate patterns of light on rocks and foliage. Even the faint sound of distant waterfalls became part of his meditation, a reminder of the slow, enduring rhythm of the world. As the caravan ascended higher, the landscape changed subtly. Grasses became sparser, trees thinner, and the scent of snow mingled with that of wild herbs. He watched the animals adjust to the incline, their hooves seeking firm footing among loose stones. Travelers moved in careful synchrony, each step deliberate, each gesture measured. Roland realized that these small adjustments, unnoticed by many, were reflections of a greater order, the world teaching its lessons to those patient enough to observe. At midday, he paused beside a small stream fed by melting snow. The water was clear and cold, and he knelt to touch it, watching the way it rippled over stones, carrying reflections of sky and mountain. The quiet movement of water, like the quiet movement of life, seemed unhurried, eternal. He noticed tiny fish darting beneath the surface, insects skimming the top, and the occasional bird swooping down to drink. In their simplicity, he recognized the deep truths of patience, endurance, and presence, the very lessons the road had been imparting for years. The caravan's pace was unhurried, guided by the rhythm of the animals and the terrain. Roland observed every gesture of the travelers, the gentle adjustment of a pack on a camel, a whispered instruction to avoid a loose stone, a careful sharing of water with a weary animal. These acts, repeated countless times across centuries, were the foundation of endurance and continuity. Roland realized that history was not only written in battles and conquests, but also in the quiet, unnoticed gestures that allowed life to persist. As evening fell, the mountains were bathed in a soft golden light. and Roland found a quiet spot on a ledge overlooking a wide valley. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and stone, and the distant flow of rivers reached his ears like a gentle song. He settled into a meditative stillness, feeling the pulse of the world move through him. He thought of the distant cities he had left behind, the battles and losses, the long roads across deserts and rivers, and he understood that all of it, every step, every hardship, every encounter had been a preparation for moments like this. Stillness, awareness, and the gentle alignment with the rhythm of the world. That night, the caravan camped on a plateau. Roland lay beneath the stars, letting the cold night air brush his face, listening to the soft murmurs of animals, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of wind through sparse trees. The sky was vast and the constellations were clear, each point of light a reminder of the continuity of time, the quiet endurance of the world, and the smallness of any one life within it. He felt no fear, no urgency, only a serene sense of belonging to the movement of the land and the passage of time. In the days that followed, the road wound through narrow passes, high ridges, and hidden valleys. Roland observed the subtle shifts in climate, vegetation, and wildlife, noting the ways travelers and animals adapted to each new stretch of terrain. He walked often at the edge of the caravan, letting the rhythm of the road guide his steps, letting the wind, the mountains, and the distant rivers teach him their quiet lessons. Each observation, no matter how small, became part of the meditative practice he had cultivated over years of travel. One afternoon, he noticed a small encampment of scholars and scribes by a quiet brook. Their tents were simple, yet meticulously arranged. They copied texts, practiced calligraphy, and taught children the arts of reading and writing. Roland watched without disturbing them, noting the dedication and precision in every movement, the care with which they preserved knowledge across generations. In their quiet labor, he saw the enduring power of human persistence, a continuity more profound than any conquest, more lasting than armies or kings. The silent man appeared again, standing at the edge of a distant ridge as the sun leaned toward the west. He did not speak, only observed, his calm presence mirroring the serenity of the mountains. Roland felt the familiar reassurance that the journey, though endless, was guided by the same principles he had been learning all along: observation, patience, endurance, and the quiet alignment of the heart with the rhythm of the world. At night, as the stars filled the sky, Roland reflected on the long road behind him. He remembered deserts crossed, rivers forded, mountains climbed, cities entered and left, companions met and lost. He recognized the unbroken thread of continuity, not in the empires that rose and fell, but in the subtle acts of human endurance and attention, the quiet gestures that preserved life, knowledge, and understanding across generations. The next morning, the caravan began a long descent into a wide valley, where forests and meadows stretched to distant hills. Roland walked slowly, savoring every step, noting the change in air, the scent of grass and soil, the pattern of sunlight through trees. Birds moved in harmony with the wind, animals grazed in quiet synchrony, and travelers adjusted their pace without words. The valley seemed alive with subtle rhythms, and Roland felt that he was not merely passing through it, but participating in the unfolding pattern of life itself. He paused by a small bridge crossing a sparkling river, watching the water flow steadily downstream. The currents carried leaves, twigs, and stones, moving with a quiet inevitability that mirrored the journey of life. Roland knelt, letting his fingers touch the cool surface, feeling the pulse of the water as an extension of the road itself. Every ripple, every reflection, every subtle shift in the current was a lesson in endurance, patience, and the meditative observation of the world. The days flowed seamlessly, each one blending into the next. Roland continued to walk steadily, observing, listening, and learning. The mountains, rivers, forests, and plains became his companions, each element teaching its own lesson. Travelers, merchants, scholars, and nomads joined the caravan briefly, each interaction a reminder that the quiet gestures of endurance and care were the truest measure of human continuity. By the time the sun set behind distant hills, Roland had grown fully attuned to the rhythm of the valley. The stars appeared clear and brilliant, mirrored faintly in the river below. He sat on a low rock, breathing slowly, feeling the wind, the water, and the pulse of life around him. He realized that the journey was not about destinations, maps or letters from distant rulers, but about presence, awareness, and the quiet accumulation of wisdom that only comes from patient observation and meditative attention. The next days unfolded like a quiet river, steady and unhurried. Roland moved through the valley with deliberate attention, noting every subtle change in terrain, vegetation, and light. Wildflowers opened to the morning sun. Insects traced invisible patterns along the riverbanks, and the distant call of birds carried over the plains. Each sound, scent, and movement became a thread in the tapestry of observation, a meditative practice in which he could lose himself entirely without losing awareness. The caravan occasionally paused at small villages, settlements built from clay, stone, and timber. Roland moved slowly through their narrow streets, watching the careful coordination of daily life. Women drew water from wells with quiet diligence, children ran barefoot through alleys, and merchants arranged goods with deliberate precision. Roland noticed the small gestures of care, a hand steadying a load, a gentle word to a child, a shared smile between neighbors, and understood that these unremarkable acts were the foundation of human endurance and continuity. One morning, as the sun rose behind distant mountains, Roland walked to the edge of the valley, where a gentle hill overlooked a forest stretching into the horizon. The light illuminated the tips of trees in gold and green, and the wind carried the scent of pine and earth. He paused, inhaling deeply, feeling the rhythm of the world pulse through him. Each movement of branches, each shift in the light, each distant sound became part of a meditation, a quiet alignment with the patterns of life that unfolded without haste or expectation. The caravan continued along winding paths that followed the contours of hills and streams. Roland walked at the edge, allowing his senses to absorb the details. The gentle rustle of leaves, the murmur of rivers, the occasional bark of distant dogs. Travelers adjusted to the terrain and each other with quiet precision, guiding animals carefully, sharing water without words, and moving in harmony with the natural rhythms around them. In these subtle exchanges, Roland saw the deeper truth of life, that endurance, observation, and patience were more profound than conquest or fame. At night, he would lie beneath the vast expanse of stars, listening to the wind move across trees and grasses, the soft murmur of the caravan settling in camp, and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. The constellations shifted slowly, yet their pattern remained constant, a reflection of the continuity and order that pervaded the world. Roland felt a deep sense of calm, knowing that the road stretched endlessly, but that his awareness, patience, and quiet presence were sufficient companions for the journey. One afternoon, he noticed a small group of nomads tending sheep on a distant slope. Their movements were careful, deliberate, and harmonious, guided by experience and intuition. He observed without intrusion, noting how each gesture, a hand to guide an animal, a call to another, a shared glance, reflected a rhythm passed down through generations. In these simple acts, Roland recognized the enduring power of human observation and cooperation, a lesson more profound than any he had learned on battlefields or in courts. The road continued to rise into higher valleys, where the air was thin and the scent of snow lingered along shaded cliffs. Roland adjusted his pace, walking with measured steps to allow his body to adapt and observing the subtle changes in flora and fauna. Streams ran cold and fast, stones glistened in the sunlight, and the occasional eagle soared overhead, its flight deliberate and precise. Each detail, no matter how small, became a teacher, and Roland allowed the rhythm of the land to guide his attention, his breath, and his movement. He often paused beside small pools formed by mountain streams, watching the reflections of sky, stone, and foliage. The water moved steadily, carrying leaves, twigs, and insects downstream. Roland knelt to touch the surface, feeling the coolness seep into him, and realized that the world moved in harmony regardless of his presence. He could witness, observe, and learn, but the road, the wind, and the water continued in their eternal rhythm. Presence, patience, and attentiveness were the only requirements to participate fully in the unfolding of life. The silent man appeared once more at the edge of the path, as the sun began to lower behind distant peaks. His eyes reflected calm assurance, and Roland understood without words. The man's presence was a reminder that the lessons of the road, observation, endurance, patience, and quiet alignment with the world, were constant, regardless of distance or circumstance. Roland nodded silently, recognizing that the journey, though unending, was the teacher itself. Evenings in the mountains brought cool air and long shadows. Roland would sit quietly on a rock, listening to the soft murmur of rivers and the gentle rustle of trees. He reflected on the road behind him. Deserts crossed, mountains climbed, cities visited, companions met and lost. And he understood that the continuity of life lay not in conquest, fame, or wealth, but in the quiet, enduring acts of observation, patience, and attentiveness, the gestures and rhythms that allowed human life to persist across generations. The caravan descended gradually into a wide valley, where meadows and forests spread to distant hills. Roland walked slowly, savoring each step, observing the subtle patterns of sunlight, shadow, and wind. Birds moved with the air, animals grazed quietly, and travelers adjusted to one another without spoken commands. Every element seemed in perfect harmony, each act a reflection of the subtle rhythms that governed life itself. At the edge of the valley, Roland found a small bridge crossing a gently flowing river. He knelt beside it, letting the cool water flow through his fingers. Leaves and small stones moved downstream in quiet patterns, and he recognized the continuity of the world reflected in the gentle motion of water. Each ripple, reflection, and current became part of his meditation, a quiet lesson in endurance, patience, and awareness. Days passed like this, seamless and steady. Roland continued to walk, observe, and listen. Mountains, rivers, forests, and plains became his companions, teaching him the lessons of life in subtle, patient ways. Travelers, merchants, scholars, and nomads crossed the road briefly, sharing meals, stories, and gestures of care. Each encounter reinforced the truth he had long understood, that the quiet, attentive acts of human endurance are more profound than the loud triumphs of battle or conquest. By sunset, the valley was bathed in a soft golden light. Roland sat on a low hill, watching the river wind toward distant forests, feeling the wind brush across his face and listening to the gentle murmur of life around him. The road stretched endlessly ahead, yet he felt no urgency. Awareness, presence, and patience were the true companions of a traveler, and he understood that the journey itself, the quiet, meditative act of observation, was the ultimate destination. The next morning, the caravan moved slowly through the valley, the path winding between gently rolling hills. Roland walked at the edge, allowing the soft rhythm of the road to guide him, observing every detail, the way sunlight shifted across rocks, the rustle of grass as the wind passed, the distant flight of birds tracing the sky in arcs of motion. Each detail became a thread in his meditation, a quiet connection to the enduring patterns of life that unfolded around him. Small settlements dotted the valley, constructed from clay, timber, and stone. Roland wandered through their narrow streets without hurry, watching daily life unfold. Children chased one another barefoot. Women drew water and tended gardens, and merchants arranged goods with quiet precision. He noticed subtle gestures, a hand placed to steady a basket, a whispered instruction to a child, a shared smile between neighbors. These seemingly trivial acts were, in his eyes, the true pillars of human endurance, the subtle currents that allowed life to persist and thrive across centuries. At midday, Roland paused beside a clear, slow-moving stream. The water reflected the blue of the sky and the gold of distant hills, while small fish darted beneath the surface. He knelt to let his fingers touch the cool water, feeling the rhythm of the current flow through him. Nearby, a flock of sheep grazed under the guidance of a shepherd, moving with deliberate, unhurried steps. In their movements, Roland saw harmony and patience, a quiet reflection of the larger patterns of life. The road continued to rise gradually, leading toward higher valleys and more rugged terrain. Roland walked deliberately, feeling each step as part of a broader rhythm. He observed the animals in the caravan, camels, horses, and mules, adjusting to the inclines and rocky soil. Travelers moved in quiet coordination, guiding animals with small gestures, sharing water, and maintaining a pace that allowed the caravan to flow steadily. Roland recognized these subtle acts as the true markers of continuity and wisdom, more enduring than any conquest or victory he had witnessed in his youth. Evening brought cooler air and long shadows across the valley. Roland often walked to higher ground, gazing at the distant peaks bathed in soft light. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, and he listened to the murmur of streams and the occasional call of birds. Each sound and movement became a focus for meditation, a way to align himself with the rhythms of the land and the quiet continuity of life. One afternoon, he encountered a small group of wandering scholars by a riverbank. Their tents were modest, but they moved with careful precision, copying texts, discussing philosophy, and teaching children. Roland observed silently, noticing the patience and dedication in every gesture, the subtle discipline that preserved knowledge and culture across generations. He understood that these quiet acts, often unnoticed by the wider world, were the true foundation of civilization. The silent man appeared once more as the sun dipped toward the horizon. His presence was calm and unobtrusive, yet carried a profound assurance. Roland understood without words that the lessons of the road, observation, patience, endurance, and presence, remained constant regardless of distance, terrain, or circumstance. The journey itself was the teacher, and each step, each observation was a continuation of the lesson. Nights in the valley were serene. Roland lay beneath the stars, feeling the cool air on his skin, hearing the rustle of trees and the distant murmurs of rivers. The constellations shifted slowly overhead, their forms unchanged across generations. He thought of the road behind him. Deserts crossed, rivers forded, mountains climbed, cities visited and left, and recognized the unbroken thread of continuity that connected all human endeavor. The quiet, attentive acts of observation and care were more enduring than any battle or conquest. The days passed in this rhythm, seamless and meditative. Roland continued to walk, observe, and listen, moving with the caravan yet often at its edge, letting the wind, the terrain, and the animals guide his attention. Each movement of nature, each gesture of human care, each subtle shift in light or air became a lesson. He no longer measured time by distance or destination. but by the depth of awareness he could sustain in each moment. One evening, the caravan reached a small mountain pass, its cliffs rising steeply on either side. Roland paused at the edge to observe the distant valleys and rivers stretching below. Sunlight glinted off streams and rocks, casting long shadows and illuminating patches of forest. The wind carried scents of pine, stone, and distant snow. Roland inhaled deeply, feeling the rhythm of the land move through him. He understood that the road, endless as it might seem, was not a path to a destination, but a meditation in motion, a practice in patient observation and enduring presence. The caravan descended slowly through the pass, the travelers moving with care over rocky ground. Roland noted the subtle adjustments made by animals and humans alike, each step deliberate, each gesture purposeful. Streams crossed the path, their waters glinting in sunlight, and he paused to touch the cool flow, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath him. Every ripple, every reflection, every movement of the land and creatures became part of his meditation, a reminder that the world continues in its own rhythm, whether or not one intervenes. At night, beneath a sky full of stars, Roland reflected on the long road behind him and the valleys still ahead. The wind whispered through trees, rivers flowed steadily, and distant animals moved in quiet synchrony. He understood that the true measure of the journey was not speed, conquest, or achievement, but awareness, endurance, and the patient observation of life as it unfolded in subtle, eternal patterns. The next morning, the caravan emerged from the pass into a wide plateau, where the land spread gently toward distant hills. Roland walked slowly, observing the subtle changes in light, scent, and sound. The grass here was taller, dotted with wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. Streams meandered through the plain, their surfaces catching the sunlight and sparkling like scattered gems. Birds moved gracefully above, occasionally diving toward the ground, their flight precise and unhurried. Every detail became part of his meditation, each movement a lesson in rhythm, patience, and enduring presence. Settlements along the plateau were few and far between. When the caravan passed through one, Roland observed quietly, noting the careful ways villagers maintained their homes, gardens, and livestock. Children ran barefoot across sun-warmed stone. Elders moved deliberately with the ease of long experience, and merchants arranged small stalls with calm, deliberate gestures. He recognized that these ordinary acts, tending, observing, and sharing, were more enduring than any battle or conquest, sustaining life through centuries with quiet constancy. At midday, he stopped beside a gentle river that glimmered in the sunlight. The water flowed slowly but steadily, carrying leaves, twigs, and small stones downstream. Roland knelt beside it, letting his fingers touch the cool surface, watching the tiny fish dart beneath. A herd of goats grazed nearby, guided by a shepherd whose gestures were subtle but precise. The harmony of water, animal, and human movement seemed like a living meditation, a quiet pattern unfolding across time and space. The caravan moved steadily across the plateau, winding among hills, through meadows, and alongside streams. Roland walked at the edge, noticing every gesture, every sound, every detail of life. Travelers adjusted to one another and to the terrain without words, guiding animals, sharing water, and maintaining a rhythm that allowed movement to continue smoothly. He realized that the quiet attentiveness of daily life, repeated endlessly, was the true foundation of endurance, civilization, and human continuity. Evenings brought soft light across the plateau. Roland often climbed small rises to observe the vastness of the land, letting the wind and the distant calls of birds fill his awareness. Streams glimmered far below, and forests appeared as patches of dark green against golden fields. The subtle shift of sunlight, the gentle movement of air, and the quiet rhythm of life became a meditation in itself. He no longer measured his journey by distance or days traveled, but by the depth of attention he could sustain to the world around him. One afternoon, the caravan passed a group of scholars traveling with scrolls and books, likely moving between distant cities. Roland observed their careful handling of texts, their precise movements, and the quiet patience that allowed them to preserve knowledge across long distances. He saw the same enduring quality he had noticed in shepherds, villagers, and traders, the quiet acts that sustain life, culture, and understanding across generations. These were the true markers of history, more lasting than armies or kings. The silent man appeared again, standing at the edge of a distant hill as the sun leaned low in the sky. He said nothing, only observed, and Roland understood. The road itself was the teacher, and the patient observation of life, the enduring calm and the attentive presence were the lessons that persisted across centuries and continents. He nodded, acknowledging the quiet truth of the road and the rhythm that had become part of his own being. Night brought clarity. Roland lay beneath a sky filled with stars, listening to the distant rustle of trees, the faint murmur of rivers, and the soft breathing of animals in the camp. The constellations slowly shifted overhead, constant yet ever-changing, reflecting the unbroken rhythm of life. He thought of the long journey behind him. Deserts crossed, mountains climbed, cities entered and left, and recognized the enduring thread of patience, observation, and quiet care that ran through all human endeavor. The following days, the caravan moved through rolling hills and gentle valleys, each step an exercise in mindfulness. Roland noticed the way sunlight shifted across the landscape, the delicate sway of grasses and the subtle changes in air as he crossed streams or entered shaded forests. Birds and animals continued their rhythms around him, and he felt a profound connection to the ongoing patterns of life, each small gesture and movement reinforcing the lessons of patience and enduring awareness. At a quiet river crossing one morning, he paused to observe a small flock of sheep guided by a shepherd. The animals moved calmly, each step deliberate, each adjustment subtle. Roland knelt beside the flowing water, letting it pass over his fingers, and reflected on the harmony of human, animal, and natural movement. Every detail, every gesture was a meditation in patience, endurance, and alignment with the world. The days flowed seamlessly, with the plateau giving way to hills and hills gradually leading to forests and meadows. Roland continued at the edge of the caravan, walking slowly, observing attentively and listening to the quiet rhythms around him. Travelers, merchants, and scholars crossed paths briefly, sharing food, water, and stories. Each encounter reinforced the same truth he had been learning, that the quiet, attentive acts of observation and care, repeated endlessly, were more enduring than battles, wealth, or power. By evening, the sun set behind distant hills, painting the land in gold and violet. Roland sat on a small rise, watching rivers wind through valleys, feeling the gentle breeze on his face and listening to the quiet movement of life around him. The road stretched endlessly, yet he felt no urgency. Awareness, presence, and patience were enough. And the journey itself, the quiet, meditative observation of life, had become the ultimate destination. The next morning, the caravan moved through a gentle valley that opened into a wide meadow. Roland walked slowly, letting the soft rhythm of the animals' steps and the wind across the grass guide his attention. Each detail of the land revealed itself gradually. The delicate sway of wildflowers, the shimmer of morning dew on leaves, the distant call of birds moving across the sky. Each observation became part of his meditation, a thread in the quiet tapestry of life that surrounded him. Small villages punctuated the meadow, their simple structures of clay and timber blending into the landscape. Roland moved carefully through them, observing daily life without intrusion. Children played among the houses. Women tended gardens and men worked livestock or repaired structures with patient precision. He noticed gestures of kindness and cooperation. A hand steadied a basket, a whispered instruction, a shared smile. These small, often overlooked acts carried the weight of history, sustaining life and culture in ways that armies and kings could never achieve. At midday, Roland paused by a shallow stream that wound lazily across the meadow. He knelt beside it, letting the cool water touch his fingers, watching as it carried small leaves and stones downstream. Nearby, a shepherd guided a flock of sheep with careful gestures, each movement unhurried but deliberate. The harmony of water, animal, and human reflected a quiet order, an enduring pattern that persisted regardless of human interference. Roland absorbed it as a meditation, recognizing the patience and attentiveness embedded in every act. The road began to rise gradually toward a series of gentle hills. Roland adjusted his pace, noting the subtle changes in vegetation, the patterns of wind over rocks and grasses, and the distant flow of rivers. The caravan moved with calm coordination, travelers guiding animals and sharing resources quietly. Every small act, adjusting a pack, guiding a horse, offering water, was part of a larger rhythm that ensured the journey continued smoothly. Roland understood that these unseen, quiet actions were the backbone of human endurance, far more enduring than any conquest or triumph. Evening fell, casting soft light across the hills and meadows. Roland often climbed slight rises to observe the distant horizon, letting the wind carry the faint sense of forests, stone, and earth. Streams glimmered, birds moved with effortless grace, and the caravan settled into a rhythm of quiet activity. He found meditation not only in stillness but in observation and participation, aligning his own presence with the ongoing patterns of life around him. One afternoon, the caravan passed a group of scholars traveling with scrolls and manuscripts. Roland watched their careful movements, copying, reading, discussing, and teaching children, and recognized the same enduring quality he had observed in shepherds, merchants, and villagers. Knowledge, like life itself, required patience, attentiveness, and quiet care. These acts, repeated over generations, created the continuity of human culture, far surpassing the fleeting triumphs of armies or rulers. The silent man appeared once more at the edge of a hill as the sun lowered behind distant peaks. He said nothing, only observed, and Roland understood. The road was the teacher, and patience, awareness, and enduring presence were the lessons that persisted across time and space. The journey itself, the walking, observing, and listening, became the meditation, the practice through which the rhythm of life revealed itself fully. Night brought a serene calm. Roland lay beneath a sky filled with stars, feeling the cool night air brush his skin, listening to the soft murmurs of rivers and the gentle rustle of trees. Constellations slowly shifted overhead, their patterns constant yet always changing. He reflected on the road behind him. Deserts crossed, rivers forded, mountains climbed, cities visited and left, and realized that the enduring thread running through all of human life was quiet attentiveness, patience, and the careful acts that allowed life and knowledge to persist. The following days, the caravan wound through gentle hills, forests, and meadows. Roland continued to move at the edge, walking slowly, observing carefully and listening intently. Each bend in the road, each sound of wind through trees, each movement of animals and humans became part of his meditation. He no longer measured distance by days or miles, but by the depth of awareness he could sustain in each moment. The richness of observation, and the quiet presence that allowed him to participate fully in the unfolding patterns of life. At a river crossing one morning, Roland paused to watch the water flow over smooth stones. Carrying leaves and small twigs downstream, a shepherd guided his flock across the river with deliberate care. adjusting the movement of each animal gently. Roland knelt beside the water, letting it flow through his fingers, and recognized the continuity of life reflected in the rhythm of nature, human and animal movements. Every ripple, every gesture, every small act became part of the meditation he carried with him. The days passed seamlessly, flowing like a quiet river. Roland moved steadily, observing, listening, and learning. The land, hills, rivers, forests, and plains, became his companion, each element offering lessons in patience, endurance, and attentiveness. Travelers, merchants, and scholars crossed paths briefly, sharing food, water, and knowledge. Each interaction reinforced the same enduring truth, that quiet, attentive acts repeated over time were far more lasting than battles, wealth, or fame. By sunset, the meadow was bathed in soft golden light. Roland sat on a low rise, watching rivers wind toward distant forests, feeling the gentle breeze, and listening to the subtle movement of life. The road stretched endlessly before him, yet he felt no urgency. Awareness, presence, and patience were the true companions of the journey, and the act of moving mindfully, observing, walking, and listening had become the ultimate destination. The following morning, the caravan rose before the sun, moving quietly across the meadow toward a series of gentle hills. Roland walked at the edge, his steps deliberate, observing the way the light touched each blade of grass, the subtle patterns in the rocks, and the distant movement of birds gliding over the landscape. Each moment became part of a meditation, a practice of patient observation and deep presence. Small villages appeared intermittently along the road. Roland moved slowly through them, watching life unfold in its simplest, most enduring forms. Women drew water from wells, tending to gardens and livestock. Children ran barefoot along narrow streets, their laughter ringing softly across stone and clay walls. Merchants arranged their wares with care and precision, while elders guided younger villagers in subtle gestures of instruction and oversight. Roland observed the small, unremarkable acts that sustained life, acts that had persisted for generations, forming the quiet backbone of human continuity. At midday, he stopped by a clear stream that meandered across the hills. The water was cold and swift, carrying small leaves, twigs, and stones downstream. Roland knelt to touch it, feeling the coolness seep into his fingers, and watched as a shepherd guided a flock of sheep across the bank. Every movement was precise yet unhurried, reflecting centuries of learned patience. The harmony of water, human and animal became a living meditation, reinforcing the subtle lessons the road had been teaching him. The terrain rose gradually as the caravan moved into a more rugged section of the hills. Roland adjusted his steps carefully, observing changes in vegetation, the slope of the land, and the movement of animals. Travelers moved with quiet coordination, sharing resources, guiding animals, and maintaining a rhythm that allowed the caravan to flow steadily. Each subtle gesture, unnoticed by many, was an essential component of enduring life, a lesson in patience, attentiveness, and quiet cooperation. Evening brought a soft golden light across the hills. Roland often climbed gentle rises to watch the sun lower behind distant peaks. Streams sparkled below, birds moved with effortless grace, and the wind whispered through the grasses and trees. These quiet observations became a meditation, a way to align his presence with the ongoing rhythms of the land. He no longer measured his journey by distance or days traveled, but by the depth of awareness he could sustain in each moment.